We'll be starting in about 2 minutes. Thank you.
I think we can start. The minister is here, and I think we can start. Yeah. Good afternoon. My name is Rula Majdalani. I am the climate advisor at ICARDA in the International Center on Agriculture Research in Dryland Areas in the Office of the Director General. It is my honor to moderate today's session on just transition agri-food systems aligned with the COP29 Harmoniya Initiative. It is a great honor, Your Excellency, Minister Majnoon Mamadov, Minister of Agriculture, to have you joining us today, along with distinguished keynote speakers and panelists. And a big welcome to you, A big welcome to the audience, to the distinguished keynote speakers and panelists, and to everyone present in the room and online. I apologize for moderating the session from Beirut, but it is still my pleasure to moderate it. I could not make it to Baku due to the security situation here in Lebanon. I would also like to apologize on behalf of Mr. Ali Abu Sabah, who could not stay back in Baku due to compelling reasons, but he sends his best wishes and his regards for what I am sure is going to be a very successful and inspiring session. In every COP, we demand to raise ambitions for climate action. If everyone wants ambitious climate actions, why then are we still moving at a very slow pace? And the reason it is because we know that there are winners and losers in this process. Unless we steer climate action towards a balance between adaptation and mitigation, upscaling investments and climate finance to address the urgent needs, particularly in vulnerable communities, vulnerable sectors, and vulnerable areas, and most of all, to achieve a just transition. Now, I will not go into the details of what just transition is. I think there has been enough debate and a good narrative on just transition. And thanks to the COP presidency and to you, Minister Majnoun, I think we have put it well on the agenda. And I think that in addition to energy and the transport sector, where they have been pioneer on the issue of just transition, I think just transition makes its headway on the climate debate. And thanks to you and FAO for really launching the Harmonia Initiative, which really aims to track the different all the different initiatives in order to give it a good push. And we believe that with a just transition, there will be really good commitment to achieve, to move ahead and raise really our ambition for succeeding collectively on achieving our goals for climate action. As COP29 tends to a hopefully successful ending, and I am sure it's going to have a successful ending with a good steering of the presidency, what we hope to take away from this side event is not just what we have learned, what is the definition of just transition. As I said, it can mean different things. There is really an ongoing debate about it. But how do we translate the just transition from concept to action? How do we address it institutionally, logistically, administratively, organizationally, and above all, in the political will commitment to really move forward and to see ourselves really achieving progress on the way to Brazil for COP30. Without further ado, I would like again to welcome Your Excellency and the distinguished keynote speakers and invite you, Minister Majnoun Mamadov, Minister of Agriculture in Azerbaijan, for giving your opening statement. The floor is yours, Minister. And before I will be switching off the camera so that we have best connection. So until I am speaking again. Minister Majnoun, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Esteemed colleagues, dear guests, it's a privilege to speak to you today on this issue that sits at the very crossroads of climate action, social equity, and economic development. Today we are gathered to discuss what a just transition truly means for agri-food systems. This is not just about transforming agriculture to meet climate goals. It is about ensuring fairness and inclusivity of the millions of farmers and rural communities who really depend on it. These individuals are often among the most vulnerable to climate change and least equipped to adapt without support. Agriculture generates a certain share of global greenhouse gas emissions, yet it also holds unparalleled potential for reducing emissions, building resilience, and ensuring food security. In Azerbaijan, we are placing agriculture at the heart of our climate action strategies. Our Baku Harmoniya Climate Initiative for farmers serves as a catalyst for global collaboration, aligning diverse stakeholders to harmonize actions, scale sustainable solutions, and empower farmers, particularly women and youth. Harmony is more than initiative. It is a commitment to ensuring that no one is left behind in this journey toward sustainability. Research and innovation are the cornerstones of a just transition. Cutting-edge advancements such as climate-smart agriculture, precision farming, and soil regeneration are transforming the way we were producing food and the way we will produce food in the future. Organizations like CGIAR are providing science-based solutions that not only mitigate climate impacts but also enhance productivity. In Azerbaijan, we are embracing digital innovation through platforms like eAgro, which give farmers access to state financial support, tools and resources that enhance their productivity and sustainability. These initiatives not only streamline agricultural processes, but also empower farmers with valuable data to make informed decisions, ultimately boosting the efficiency of the agricultural sector in the whole region. We prioritize inclusivity, ensuring that women and youth are central to our agricultural transformation. Therefore, our gender equality strategy integrates a wide range of tools, policies, and projects to create opportunities for women farmers. Over the past few years, more than 177,000 women farmers have benefited from these initiatives. 4 years ago, the number of registered women farmers was almost close to zero on our eAgro platform. But today they constitute 26% of 683,000 farmers that are registered on eAgro. This steady increase is a clear indicator of the growing participation of women with digital tools in agriculture. Each year we continue to see more women registering and benefiting from digital tools and resources. Azerbaijan's policy framework for climate resilience emphasizes the sustainable management of land and water resources. We are committed to mitigating climate risks through climate-resilient agricultural practices and improving water resources efficiency. A key focus of our efforts is the nationwide modernization of irrigation systems, an initiative aimed at achieving 100% modernization. In our dry regions, where every drop of water is vital for sustaining livelihoods and ensuring food security, efficient water management is not just a priority, it's a necessity. A key step forward is ensuring that just transitions in agri-food systems are integrated into national and global climate policies. Concepts like equity, inclusivity, and sustainability must be embedded in national adaptation plans and NDCs. In Azerbaijan, we are working to ensure that the agriculture is recognized as both a contributor to and a solution for climate action in these frameworks. By influencing policy discussions, we can create an enabling environment that drives innovation, attracts investment, and ensures farmers at the center of the decision-making. Governments, researchers, private sector actors, and civil society must work together. Most importantly, farmers must be active partners, not just passive recipients. Ladies and gentlemen, collaboration underpins our mission. We continuously develop our partnerships with international organizations, and private sector players who bring valuable expertise and resources to our agricultural sector. Together, we are investing in sustainable land management, water conservation, climate-resilient crop varieties, and enhanced disaster preparedness. These initiatives align with the goals of the Baku Harmoniya Climate Initiative for Farmers, which fosters a unified global effort towards sustainable agri-food systems that we wish to reach in the future. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you, Minister Mamadov, for an informative and inspiring talk. And I would like to commend for really pushing ahead for for having agriculture at the heart of the climate debate, at the heart of the national reform and the NGCs, and also congratulate you and our colleagues in FAO for the successful launch of the COP29 Harmoniya Initiative. And with that, let me pass on the floor to our colleague, to Professor Charles Spillane, who is the board member of the ICARDA, in ICARDA, board member, and the lead in agriculture, food systems, and the bioeconomy research center at the University of Galloway. Charles, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Rula, and thanks very much to Minister Mamadov, and congratulations to the COP presidency in launching the Harmoniya Initiative with FAO in the recent days. It's a really wonderful initiative. So a just transition, it means transforming economies and economic systems in a way that is fair and inclusive to everybody concerned, and generating decent work and leaving nobody behind. But it really has to ensure that those who stand to lose out economically, in the short term at least, they're adequately supported. And when we talk about they can be countries, regions, industries, communities, workers or consumers. So at many different levels, the just transition is relevant. The uncomfortable truth is that the agri-food systems transformation towards more sustainable, healthy and equitable agri-food systems will involve pathways leading to winners and losers in each country, as Rula indicated. We should also be reminded that the leave no one behind is the central transformative promise of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, and indeed all of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. However, even our current agri-food systems fail to deliver adequate food and decent livelihoods for millions of people. 1 in 10 people on the planet still suffer from hunger as of 2023, about 733 million people, with Africa and Asia having the highest incidences of hunger. So our current agri-food systems, and there are already those that are losers essentially in relation to its delivery. 1 in 3 people on the planet can't afford a healthy diet as of 2022. So if we take a climate crisis perspective, which is the real motivating factor for the COP29 and the previous COPs and future COPs, the agri-food sector accounts for up to 33% of total greenhouse gas emissions, as the Minister indicated, contributing to climate change impacts on the most vulnerable in every country. The majority of the world's most climate vulnerable populations, they depend on agriculture for their livelihoods. This consultative group in international agricultural research, the CGIAR, FAO and the multilateral investment banks have critical roles to play in supporting national governments and in-country stakeholders to identify, develop and accelerate evidence-based just transition pathways for their agri-food sectors. If we look at the drylands, as the Minister indicated, the agri-food systems and livelihoods of the countries in the dryland zones of our planet are amongst those most in need of evidence-based transition pathways. 1 in 3 people live in the drylands. 70% of the population of the drylands are dependent on agriculture for their livelihoods. They're also the most climate vulnerable systems, with high risks of climate loss and damage to their livelihoods. Some are fragile states and with other compounding vulnerabilities. For over 40 years, the International Centre for Agricultural Research in the Dryland Areas, or ICARDA, has been engaged in partnership-based research and innovation to address food security and resilience challenges in the drylands. ICARDA and the CGIAR see COP29 as a critical moment to mobilise efforts towards a just transition in agri-food systems, highlighting inclusivity and collaboration. For just transition pathways to deliver expected outcomes, it's really critical that ICARDA and others work really closely with smallholder farmers, rural communities, national systems and stakeholders to co-develop, test and accelerate innovations that foster just transitions. ICARDA has already been doing this for many decades with farmers. So the just transition on agri-food systems needs to be done with farmers. For example, ICARDA is integrating smallholder farmer needs into research and all of its research and technology development to ensure that the solutions are practical and impactful. Examples include the development of heat-tolerant wheat varieties through farmer participatory breeding in Sudan and Iraq, improving yields by 25% in challenging and ever-challenging climates. There's a critical role for science and innovation for evidence-based just transitions. ICARDA is developing water-saving technology such as raised bed irrigation systems in Egypt, which have improved water use efficiency by 20% and increased wheat productivity by 25% in over 100,000 hectares. Climate resilient crops are critical to the future. ICARDA is amongst the portfolio of crops that ICARDA works on. It has developed high-yield lentil varieties in Ethiopia, again increasing productivity by 60% and benefiting over 300,000 farmers. The Minister mentioned digital innovations. ICARDA is working with many countries on digital innovations to empower farmers to be more climate resilient. One example is digital irrigation scheduling in Morocco, which has reduced water usage by 15%. So ICARDA can deliver impact with national partners on the just transition. It's working with over 10 million smallholders through national systems, helping them to adapt to climate shocks and sustain productivity. But also regional collaborations are critically important for just transitions at the regional level. It's important that the just transitions in one country don't negatively impact on just transitions in other countries. So there's a rationale for regional collaboration to develop just transitions that benefit all. ICARDA has fostered regional partnerships in the Caucasus and Central Asia, building dialogues on water management, climate-smart agriculture and food systems resilience. One example is the integrated crop livestock systems in Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, which have increased soil organic matter by 30% and reduced grazing pressures, directly benefiting over 70,000 livestock-dependent households. So, in taking all of that into account, ICARDA and CGIAR call to action in this session is really to recognise the major need and indeed the opportunity for mobilising climate finance that is targeted towards just transitions in the agri-food sector. There's a particular opportunity and an urgent need to leverage climate funds like the GCF and the Global Environment Facility to scale proven solutions from the CG and ICARDA and national systems for dryland farming systems, particularly in regions vulnerable to climate change. Unfortunately, the countries with the most alarming levels of hunger and the highest levels of climate vulnerability tend to be those with the least access to financing, highlighting the need for innovative, inclusive and equitable solutions to scale up investments for a just and equitable transition. This session has 4 objectives, and just offer a few reflections on considerations in relation to those. The first is the role of research and innovation in driving a just transition. There's really a critical need to model, understand, pilot just transition pathways to maximise benefits and minimise trade-offs or unintended outcomes. There's a need to identify what types of research and innovation with farmers work best for enabling and guiding evidence-based transitions. And participatory research with farmers and national stakeholders is critical for co-creation and ownership of the evidence necessary for informed just transition pathways. The second objective relates to promoting collaboration between key stakeholders, and as Rula indicated, there are winners and losers in any of these pathways. So it's important to understand the roles and the relationship between actors, and about forging consensus about what is meant by a just transition pathway at the national level and how this interrelates with just transitions in other sectors. Just transitions is one of those terms that can have different meanings to different people. In fact, it has some constructive ambiguity. So it's really important to foster dialogue to try and get a shared understanding of what is meant by justice, equity, inclusivity, transformation and future visions of agri-food systems. So when we see transitions of agri-food systems, it's important to be, some people may see them as a transition towards employment-related outcomes, others may see them as justice-related. So the third objective is bringing together diverse voices, and this is critically important to be inclusive, and particularly bringing those who are marginalised. But we shouldn't underestimate the challenge of bringing together different groups who may perceive dialogue with each other as a win-lose situation, and there's a real need for conflict resolution in relation to fostering just transition pathways. Final objective really is about looking at why the agri-food systems are not to the fore in the dialogue about just transitions, and really here communication, advocacy, engagement by all of the agri-food system actors is important. 1/4 of the world's workforce work in agriculture and food systems, and all 8.2 billion people on the planet are consumers within food systems. So it's really important that farmers and food consumers and agri-food stakeholders are represented at global, national and regional levels in relation to the dialogue and the activities in relation to fostering just transitions. The CGIAR and ICARDA have a key role to play in guiding and enabling evidence-based just transitions at the national level through partnership-based research, innovation, advocacy, coordination and capacity building. And there's quite a lot of research and innovation and capacity building to be done within every country to identify, pursue and realise the most optimal just transition pathway. This COP29 session is intended to begin a journey of fostering dialogue towards a just and equitable transition in agri-food systems that builds from and is aligned with the Harmoniya Initiative launched 2 days ago here in Baku. So thank you all for being here, and we look forward to hearing the dialogue.
Thank you. Thank you, Charles, for eloquently showing in facts and figures the urgency of action for achieving a just transition. And as you very nicely say it, the constructive ambiguity that is out there, so that it really pushes us to think, how do different partners and how do different stakeholders perceive their role and the need for action, and also for highlighting the regional dimension and the efforts that Azerbaijan within the region is really pushing for this transformation and on the basis of a just transition. Let me now turn to our colleague, Inkar Kadirsnova. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly, Inkar. And I want to congratulate you for launching the Harmoniya Initiative, and you can consider CGIAR an active partner in that. Already we've worked together on parts of it, and on the just transition together, and hopefully we will be together in operationalizing this process. Inkar, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Rula, and thank you organizers for inviting FAO to this side event. I think the scheduling of the side event right after the release of the text on just transition is really very remarkable and very timely. But I want to start by saying thank you to Your Excellency, Mr. Mamadov, for the excellent collaboration in the run-up to COP29 and for the joint launch of the Baku Harmoniya Initiative. I'm really looking forward to many years of joint work, because the launch is only an inaugural moment. I think the most exciting part is in the continued engagement, collaboration and implementation of this initiative. And I'm also excited to see that when we talk about Harmoniya, we also think about the just transition principles. It was already mentioned that the discussion on the just transition in energy sector has started close to 3 decades ago, when the party started thinking about the fair process of just transition away from the fossil fuels. But the conversation on what is the just transition in the context of agriculture and food security still needs to take place. Of course, the research is there, the academia has already done the work, the IPCC has offered us a very broad definition of the just transition. But I think the role of the international community and the academia is now to understand how this global agenda can be translated to the local needs, and how specifically the agriculture sector is vulnerable to climate change, and what type of responses are needed to ensure that the process of transformation in the sector is indeed just and based on the principles of human rights, the right to food and fairness. So it was already mentioned that agriculture is quite unique and it's very different from the energy sector. It's different in terms of its mitigation carbon footprint, but also in its ability to sequester climate GHG emissions. It's also different in terms of the direct connection to the bio-natural environment and dependency of the agricultural livelihoods on climate change and the impacts on agriculture. We also know that the sector struggles to address the increasing pressures, such as the increasing number of people who experience hunger and food insecurity. As you know, the FAO has estimated that close to 800 million people are facing hunger now, and in the run-up to 2030, this number can increase by 100 million people more due to the climate change impacts if no action is taken now. It's also the sector that contributes to 80% of the biodiversity loss. So that's the sector that on one hand is highly vulnerable, but then on the other hand also contributes quite significantly to the challenges and this intersecting crisis that the world community is struggling with. So I think it is the responsibility of all of us who sit here in this room to contribute in many ways to a better understanding of what just transition is and what are the feasible solutions that could be accepted by the smallholder farmers. We know that the agricultural labor force is very diverse, and women represent a significant share of the agriculture labor force, with 80% at the global level and increasing up to 70% in Asia, and maybe even the share is higher in certain countries. So all the solutions that we propose should definitely be gender sensitive and gender transformative, and should be based on the strong footing of the food-based solutions and right to food. It's also important to be reminded that the private sector has an important role to play, and maybe the role that the private sector can take on themselves is in promoting the green solutions and promoting the use of green technologies. There's a lot of evidence that there are low-cost available technologies that could be disseminated pretty easily across many agricultural households. Of course, the adjustment would be needed to recognize the local context, but then a lot of support would also be needed to build the matching capacity building. We recognize that there is a lot of resistance among the smallholder farmers to the change process, because there could be some short-term losses, or there are some significant trade-offs. And also the sector has to deliver the food production that is efficient, that is climate smart, that is adequate, and that also is able to deliver the quality food that meets the health and nutrition standards. So the discussion on just transition in the context of agriculture is highly complex, and this is the conversation that should involve a lot of stakeholders, and we should secure that there is the social dialogue and that it's an ongoing engagement with stakeholders representing the governments, but also representing the most vulnerable communities. FAO has already started working on trying to better understand what are those just transition principles that are most relevant for agriculture. We're happy to continue our joint work with CGIAR in this area, but also happy to engage the other partners, and potentially we can strike a lot more partnerships at the intersection of climate, just transition, and agriculture and food security. Thank you for inviting us to this event.
Thank you, Inkar, for really a very inspiring keynote address. Of course, FAO is our partner, and we're happy to be collaborating with you all the way. I'm really happy that you are mentioning that the conversation needs to bring the social dimension. You're highlighting the importance of small holders and farmers, and especially the gender dimension, which His Excellency and Charles have also mentioned in that respect. This is really an important transformative moment where we are seeing the importance of having an open dialogue, changing the mindset, because climate action cannot happen without this inclusive process bringing everybody on board. Now that we have heard from the policymaker, the development expert, and the research community represented in our three keynote speakers, let me turn to the panelists who have also bringing from their different perspective, their understanding, and also highlighting what they are doing and where do they see the road ahead in terms of transforming the agri-food system into on the pathway to a just transition. So let me start by welcoming Ms. Melissa Pinfield. She is Executive Director in the Just Rural Transition. She is also joining us online. Welcome, Melissa. And Melissa, in your experience leading the just rural transition, how can we ensure that smallholder farmers are not just beneficiaries, but active participants in shaping policies and strategies for sustainable agri-food systems? The floor is yours.
Oh, yes. Thank you so much. And thank you for the question. Just been listening to those opening speakers there, and I'm really struck by how this conversation, how these sorts of initiatives and dialogues have really evolved over the years. And it's really quite heartening to see the increased prominence given to just transition and the importance of unpacking that and understanding that and finding the kind of the spaces to have these conversations as well. The Just Rural Transition Initiative launched in 2019. So coming out of the Climate Action Summit around a just transition vision statement. And that really was a recognition that at the time, just transition had been understood as something very much in the energy context, but really food and agriculture was really lagging behind in terms of the kind of the prominence and attention that it was getting. So the vision statement was a way of really coalescing a different set of actors from governments, civil society, business, and many, many others around what does this mean? How could we take forward a kind of a shared vision and understanding of how to implement the changes in line with the principles of a just transition. As a community, the Just Rural Transition has also worked on a set of principles. I've heard principles being mentioned by some of the other speakers as well. We offer ours that were developed a couple of years ago, really as a starting point for anyone who's interested in thinking about a policy process or developing a business strategy or anything. Those principles just sit there as a way of kind of guiding people through the different elements, whether it's that procedural justice side of like inclusive consultative processes, or whether it's more the distributional justice side. So, how can we make sure that the changes or the approaches that are being developed are really better understanding the impact it has, and particularly looking to mitigate the impacts on those who are already the most vulnerable. In terms of like your specific question then on what can we do to kind of really ensure that smallholder farmers are not just beneficiaries but active participants in shaping those policies and strategies. This is so important because smallholder farmers are on the front line of climate shocks and impacts. So climate change is predicted to reduce major crop yields by 3 to 7% every year for every 1 degree rise in temperature, and yet demand and food security is rising. Smallholder farmers play a crucial role in maintaining food supplies. They produce 80% of the food in Africa and Asia, and they are acting as stewards of land, biodiversity, and natural resources. They're already driving adaptation and mitigation efforts, spending around $368 billion a year of their own income, but they're only receiving 1.7% of global climate finance. Clearly, that's a big discussion point around this climate COP, and that absolutely has to change. So to achieve a just transition, farmers must be recognized as critical agents of change and co-designers and implementers of food system solutions. So through their representatives, they need voice and agency in decision-making through meaningful engagement. That means a seat at the table where these conversations are happening. For that to happen, we need to strengthen the capacity of the organizations that represent them. So this will ensure that they can work with their members to identify the real pain points that they are facing, as well as develop policy relevant proposals. We need to design tools that are accessible to farmers and pilot approaches and gather feedback from farmers. I think some of the previous panelists, the leading speakers, have already mentioned these sorts of things that are important. There's a huge opportunity to draw on the knowledge that these smallholder farmers already have about their land. They are the ones who best understand their land. They are the ones who are already seeing the impacts of climate change and nature loss and all the other sort of the confluence of crises, if you like, that are kind of impacting those on the front line and having to already find solutions to that. In some cases, they need resources to validate the evidence that's emerging from the land, from these bottom-up solutions, whether it's regenerative agriculture, for example. So there are great examples that we're seeing of where farmers are working with local universities and research institutes to help validate what they're already seeing as solutions so that they can offer these to policy-making processes and others as things that could be really scaled and accelerated that are already benefiting farmers and help them address the challenges that they face. It's great to see more visible presence of farmers organizations at recent COPs and across the Rio conventions. So another thing that we've been doing through the Just Rural Transition is working really closely with those global, regional and national farmers organizations to support them with media training, technical briefings, and those sorts of things to really help them get coordinated and make sure that their key priorities are being elevated and heard and lifted to the highest level. So whether that's at the global level through processes like these COPs, UNFCCC, CBDs, UNCCD is coming up soon as well. A number of them are now starting to issue their specific calls to action. They are really calling for effective and early access to decision making to influence national development commitments, for example, and as well as to working at the international level. So really kind of helping them get that seat at the table. And then just finally, I wanted to really applaud and thank the COP29 Harmoniya Initiative for being launched here at COP29. Sad I can't be there in the room with you right now. And great to see this growing awareness and emphasis on just transition for food and agriculture, for what this means and how we can implement it. So really looking forward to hearing the rest of the speakers and congratulations on this session today.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Melissa. For very well driven points that you have made, and I think, and thank you for emphasizing how important it is to bring the farmers and the smallholders to have a seat at the table. This is very important, and emphasizing. We'll be coming back to you in case we have more time for a second round of questions to address what are the institutional mechanisms and tools and investment to bring and the capacity that is needed to really ensure that the process that they have really an active role in that sense. Let me now invite the other panelists, the distinguished panelists, to the podium. Ms. Rachel Barza, from Associate Director, Climate Adaptation and Nature Finance at the EBRD, the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. Let me also invite Ms. Zona Abdullayeva, who is the COP29 presidency expert and a leading player on the Harmoniya Initiative, and Dr. Jan Wilkens, who is senior researcher at the Center for Earth Systems Research and Sustainability at the University of Hamburg, and a leading expert on climate change, migration, and in vulnerable countries, and particularly in our region, in the ICARDA, in the MENA region. Welcome, colleagues, welcome, distinguished panelists. Let me now turn to Rachel with a question. What role do you think the private sector plays in scaling investments for a just transition in agri-food systems, and how can development banks play a role, such as EBRD play a role in that, noting that COP29 has been hailed as adopted as the finance club, COP par excellence. So we would like your thoughts on that too. The floor is yours, Rachel.
Thank you. And I'd also like to start with thanking, I think, Inka, our colleague from FAO, for mentioning the biodiversity lens in the conversation around just transition, because I have nature finance in my title as well, and I'm here in my best pollinator-themed clothing today, because there's no talk of just transition in agriculture without talk of the biodiversity impacts and potential for agriculture as well. So I appreciate that that's a theme in the conversation. But you mentioned as well that this COP is the finance COP, and that definitely sheds a lens onto what we can do for just transition in agriculture. Because EBRD is a development bank, and the second word there is a bank. So that does guide exactly what we can do in this space. And we are a large organization as well, and despite our name having European in it, only about 1/3 of our countries of operation are actually in the European Union. But we work across North Africa, Central Asia, and the Caucasus, including here in Azerbaijan. So we certainly have a perspective on the needs and vulnerabilities of the region. We're also a private sector focused bank, so the question is incredibly relevant to our work. But because of the structure of the markets in a lot of the countries we operate in, it has been very challenging for us to directly engage with primary production, with the actual farmers and livestock managers who are producing the food that we all eat and who need to become more resilient to climate change. So we have some large clients who we're working with, which is of course important. We've seen how food crises and other crises throughout the world can affect food supply and prices and leads to cost of living issues for everyone. So it's absolutely important the large producers also become climate resilient. But the smaller ones are more immediately vulnerable and do lack resources and access to resources to support their pathway to resilience. But we have to be a little bit creative as an institution in a way we can try to support them. And one way we try to do that is through working with these larger clients, but in the midstream of the agribusiness value chain. So we work more with the food processors, manufacturers, packagers, and try to reach their supply chains through their operations. So just for a couple of examples, in Turkey, we've worked with Bunge, an olive oil producer, to reach 480 of their olive suppliers, mostly women, to increase climate-smart agricultural practices for olive farming. Also in Turkey, we've worked with Tatgida, which is a canned food and tomato product producer, with their supply chain to reach 1,200 small farmers to promote water use efficiency in their operations, which is obviously important in a water-stressed region like these dryland areas we're talking about. In Mongolia, we've worked with a dairy producer, Apu Dairy, and along with FAO and some other stakeholders for a client program to improve livestock management practices for their dairy, including rotational grazing for both climate resilience and nature benefits. So there's this model of what we might call client-intermediated capacity building, which we think is really useful for leveraging our large institution, our higher standards for environmental and social practices, which we pass on to our clients, and our Paris alignment agreement requirements, which we also try to pass on to those clients as a priority, to reach these smaller producers and improve their resilience. But what about the finance? What about how we get the finance to smaller producers? So we're very lucky as a bank to have really strong relationships with partner financial institutions in the countries where we operate. So we work with these PFIs to help them onward lend to households and small producers. And they can lend for approved green technologies such as precision irrigation or rainwater capture or greenhouses or no-till agricultural equipment that can improve the resilience of farmers' operations. We're always looking for new ways to increase our resilience in intermediate finance. And it's a real challenge because we want to make sure it's high integrity, and it's difficult to monitor more operational changes, which is crucial to farming resilience. Monitoring them from a distance is challenging. So technologies is a strong starting point. We're always looking for more technologies to build into the eligibility criteria for the lending. But we're also working to improve capacity and understanding of climate risks. And sometimes that's with the institutions themselves, with the banks that are onward lending to these smaller producers, to help them understand the physical climate risks their clients are facing. So right now, for example, we're working with the Global Center on Adaptation to deliver a master class on physical climate risk for some of our partner banks, so they really can appreciate what's coming in terms of the extreme heat and drought and changing patterns of precipitation and temperature and seasonality that the farmers are going to have to increasingly become responsive to. And we're also looking for opportunities to improve training for the farmers themselves, of course. So recognizing this challenge of a large institution needing to reach these smaller producers, we really welcome any and all initiatives to aggregate all of the broader initiatives and conversations around just transition and indeed just resilience as well, which are similar, separate, sometimes in the same voice-spoken issues, into a platform of a scale that we as a large institution can productively engage with.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Rachel. We will be coming back to listen to more of your insight on how do you how do you target the capacity building efforts, and how do you reach? I was really impressed to see that you work through a number of partner finance institutions in this process, and that you really try to improve the outreach to smallholders and working across all the actors in the supply chain. I think the CGIAR centers, different centers, will be happy to collaborate with you on this outreach to make their knowledge and the capacity building that they deliver relevant on the ground, reaching out to people in remote areas, particularly in our region. Let me now turn to Sona. Sona has been very active throughout the process, has been very active in pushing for with the presidency, with the COP29 presidency, but also with the Harmoniya initiative, and with a lot of knowledge from the field. Sona, as an expert from COP29 presidency, how do you see the potential for operationalizing the Harmoniya initiative, and what role do you see for just transition in implementing this initiative? I think that that will also build on what Inkar and Melissa have highlighted, and as well as Rachel. Sona, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I see a really great potential in Harmoniya Initiative because it is collaborative platform. It will facilitate knowledge sharing, help to mobilize investments, and align efforts of different stakeholders. This initiative is bringing together existing programs and fostering dialogues, consultations, which will create synergies and avoid duplication and help to catalyze investments for climate resilient agri-food systems. A just transition is crucial for ensuring that marginalized communities, especially smallholder farmers, women and youth, are not left behind. So Harmoniya seeks for inclusive empowerment, capacity building, policy support, which will ensure that all vulnerable groups have resources, all required resources and skills to adapt to climate change. By integrating these all principles, Harmoniya can ensure an equal and sustainable transition which will benefit all involved parties. So that's it, if you need more elaborate in it.
I was getting the connection a bit cut off in that sense. I definitely I will be coming back to see as Azerbaijan, how will you move this way forward, whether on implementing the Harmoniya or on the just transition. Last but not least, Jan Vilkens, can you please highlight, as a researcher, what are the biggest knowledge gaps in implementing a just transition in agri-food system? And how can the scientific community help bridge these gaps, particularly in the MENA region?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks a lot also from my side for this invitation and great panel where we have already heard some great insights and I think as well already great research going on. Already Charles mentioned something and some key issues I think in the first part. And my perspectives, as you mentioned in the beginning, is more from a climate research perspective and just transition perspective. So when it comes to the MENA region, and I think it's an interesting region because obviously it's also highly important with regard to food, it's highly important when we think about the impact of climate change. It's a region the IPCC calls, also identifies as a hotspot, the Mediterranean region, and in that sense, I think it's a region where we can learn a lot as well. So, next to the things that researchers are already doing right now, all the practical aspects, I think there are still some gaps that I think research can do in the near future and build on what is done so far. Keeping also in mind that it is really a complex issue. So just transition sounds great and ambiguity that is there also means it's really complex, I think, in terms of really doing good research. I think one very basic thing is, of course, understanding local context. I think what we heard so far underlines the importance of that, understanding local context, and of course when it comes to agricultural data, but also when it comes to socio-economic conditions and so on and so forth. And the MENA region, when we, for example, look into North Africa, we see a challenge, for example, there in access to data. So there is data, but a lot of researchers have also really issues with accessing this data. So that's something that needs to be addressed. And then we have already heard climate change impact assessments. I think that's really, really important because from climate change research we know there is a lot of uncertainty as well. There is a lot of uncertainty. We work with different scenarios regarding temperature, with different socioeconomic scenarios, but of course there is a lot of uncertainty, especially as we do not 100% know, of course, what is the exact relation between climate change and climate variability in a particular region. So we need to know better also when it comes, for example, in looking into adaptation measures, for example, what that relation is. Then, of course, a third point I would highlight here is the socioeconomic impact of transition itself. So that refers to this complexity. We heard there will be potentially losers, there will be change, there is a societal change, so that is a societal challenge. So I think research really needs to look better into, and I am thinking here also about social science research, into the impacts of transition itself on society. Then a fourth point is the integration of, well, some call it traditional knowledge, some call it local knowledge. There is a lot of contestation around these terms, but I think what we know and what we do have to acknowledge, there is this kind of local knowledge, and I think it's really important to highlight that in any kind of dialogue, it's not a one-way negotiate or discussion. It's really, if we want to take seriously local context, then we also need to take local knowledge seriously. And then maybe as a final point, that's of course policy frameworks and governance. Of course, when we talk about local knowledge or local context, the question is then still of what is the scale we are talking about. And of course, farmers and local communities are of course highly shaped by national governments, by national circumstances and regional circumstances. So I think we also need to see that these actors are not outsiders of these or external actors, but they are integral part of this. And there is also the question whether and to what extent there is change also on this scale. So, yeah, I could continue the list, but I'll keep it at these 5 points. Thank you.
Thank you, Jan. This is really a good introduction and a good emphasis on the role of research, which complements what Charles has been saying in that sense, and the importance of knowledge driving or providing the right tools for building a just transition. Let me first see if there are comments or questions from the floor before I go to a second round of questions to the panelists. And for that, I will need SP's help or the Secretariat's help so that
Rula,
I can we can turn. Yeah. Please.
Thanks a lot for the information of all the speaker and also panelists. My name is Tuyen from Alliance Biodiversity and CGIAR, and we work deeply on also how to bring the biodiversity. Like I really love the idea on how the SME also turn back to support the transformation of small farmers. That's from the food environment work. And for the just transition, I think very important for this day, especially under the different problem in climate and also environment and also other things. Because for example, in Asia, the transition in Asia and the Pacific country facing not calorie insufficient anymore, but they facing the problem of the overnutrition and micronutrient deficiency in transition. And the farmers, also the consumer, and they are still facing the problem, not only income, but also their health and nutrition outcome. So thinking beyond of that, how to bring the transition to be in line with the specific problem in the continent, not only at country, but implementation very important for upcoming years. Because the only way to reduce the emission is from implementation level. But how to do that? We need to think beyond the pressure on the farmer changing, but also from other sector, especially to provide more evidence on the transition to move from the producer pressure to other actor contribution for the policy makers. Very important for Asia. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you. Would you like to address it to anyone in particular, your comment?
I would love to hear from the panelists here, but also the panelists and how the harmonies can also support with the just transition to bring that on the route for more actionable to not only benefit farmer and producer, but also consumer. Yeah, thank you very much.
So I'm going to put my biodiversity hat on again for a moment, because I think the issue of nutrition is part of this conversation about how agriculture works and what we get out of the food we're growing, and part of that is what we take out of the land that we're growing on. And we need to have good quality ecosystems, soil, water, to get good quality nutrition out of the food we grow into it. So hopefully, this climate smart agriculture can be linked. We don't need to have 72 different plans with climate, nature, biodiversity, justice here. They all need to be linked into one, where we recognize that the food system is serving people fundamentally, and we need to design it so that it can continue to do that through the changes of climate, through sustainability of the resources and the natural systems that we are extracting this food from. So ideally, this goes to the policy dialogue and the inclusive nature of it. We bring people together, all these different voices together. We don't need a nature-positive pathway and a low-carbon pathway. We need one clear pathway for the agricultural sector that delivers what we need long-term.
Thank you for the question. Of course, the first goal of the Harmoniya is to bring all policymakers, all stakeholders, and of course farmers, voice of farmers into table, and to hear from them what's the problems in terms of farmers, gender, problems, youth, women, and to bring these ideas, concern, needs to two stakeholders which are policymakers, and these policymakers will it will help them and guide them how to make the right policy which will help to farmers and other stakeholders to achieve sustainable agri-food systems. Of course, and in terms of finance, we also will work with different banks, including MDBs, also with local banks, which are making giving credits to farmers, and in some cases, in most cases, farmers have the problem. Especially smallholder farmers they have a problem with credits, microcredits and limited resources, and we want to give them chance to express themselves, what are their concerns and how we can help them, maybe development guidelines for them, maybe development guidelines for banks which are operating locally, and make bridge between the banks and farmers, and to address all these issues in terms of finance, in terms of policy making, and in terms of farmers' problems. And our goal is, as a Harmoniya, to bring all together and to achieve the harmonized solution for all problems of agriculture sector, and adopt and mitigate all effects of climate change in that direction.
Okay. Thank you, Sona. Thank you. Any other question from the floor? Isbi? Okay, I don't see any
no more
hand.
questions.
No. Okay, let me turn to Melissa. And I think this issue really falls into the actions and the policy making that you are striving to do as the Just Rural Transition, to drive policy alignment with across governments and stakeholders to integrate the agri-food systems into the broader climate resilience. How would that be? And to achieve low-emission development strategies on the basis of these the just transition principles. Melissa?
Thanks so much. So as I mentioned earlier, Just Rural Transition is a multi-stakeholder initiative. So we really are that platform that's trying to bring together a very diverse and broad global community of practice that's focused on transforming food systems to deliver positive outcomes for people, nature, and climate. So it's quite a broad spectrum. So we bring together farmers, governments, businesses, investors, civil society, indigenous peoples, local communities, organizations representing women, youth, and many others. So essentially around championing those people-centered solutions to food systems challenges that we've been discussing here at this event today. Last year, in collaboration with the Climate Champions team and Ambition Loop, we developed, through a consultative approach, a non-state actor call to action on transforming food systems for people, nature, and climate. And this sets out from this community a shared vision and unites diverse agri-food systems actors around a set of 10 priority actions to achieve resilient, sustainable, equitable food systems. And just transition is embedded as a key principle within this. This was intentionally designed to complement the COP28 UAE Leaders Declaration on Sustainable Agriculture, Resilient Food Systems and Climate Action, in which 160 countries have pledged to put agri-food systems at the heart of their climate and other national policies and investment plans. So really around that alignment point that we've heard from other panelists, around the importance of not putting this in isolation, but how can we really have overarching sort of approaches that integrate the food and the nature and the food security and the inclusive economic development together into these coherent plans. So in terms of non-state actors, there's really huge momentum building and a commitment to support governments with ambitious implementation of that declaration and also their national strategies and plans. As of this month, we've just announced that over 300 entities have endorsed that, and that represents 1.2 billion farmers, subnational governments representing 2.2 billion residents, businesses with an annual revenue of $1 trillion along the agri-food value chain. And we've got 150 civil society and philanthropic organizations representing regions all across the world, with 1/3 headquartered in emerging and developing countries. So what I'm really trying to say out of that is that there are a lot of groups, organizations, and entities there really working and committed to supporting governments with that policy alignment and to implement their plans. The role that initiatives like JRT can play is to help. Sounds very, very similar and aligned with Harmoniya, which is we need the spaces for those inclusive multi-stakeholder convenings to develop at the national and local level, those context-specific pathways. So partners are bringing analytical and technical support. They're providing policy briefings, for example, and then we've got a knowledge hub on Just Transition website where you can see many relevant reports, policy briefs, and tools that are being developed from this broad community that are helping develop the case. We've got a series of case studies that's also just been released this week in a report. It shows you exactly what good looks like, how we've got examples emerging from all around the world on how partners are coming together to implement solutions. We've got this growing evidence base of what works that can be adapted to specific local contexts. So back to you, Rula.
Thank you, Melissa. And although the non-state actors' voice sometimes is slow in coming about, but it ends up influencing decision making, there is a way to, with its coherent approach and what you're doing in a systematic way to bring it to influence really decision making. Let me turn to Rachel, and maybe Rachel, maybe put you on a spot, not as the biodiversity expert, but more representing the banks and the donors, and especially in a region like the MENA region. We often see really a skewed approach to financing for mitigation rather than adaptation. And I think that you have really highlighted the good efforts that you are doing in pushing for financing adaptation, and the bank, I'm sure, is really pushing for that as well. How can we ensure that climate finance mechanisms really reach the agri-food systems? In the MENA region, I can tell you that water, agriculture, health have been identified as a priority, yet when we see the transfer of funding, it's they are in comparison to mitigation. So how EBRD and the finance mechanisms can really redress this factor?
This is my pain
Over
every
to
day.
you, Rachel.
Adaptation is the first half of my title, and it is an incredibly challenging topic to deliver as a bank. As you say, we are fundamentally a bank. We operate generally commercially. We channel donor resources into concessional finance where it won't distort the market and where the impacts are sufficiently meaningful and difficult to monetize that the donors are willing to mobilize resources to that effect. And to their credit, I do think donors are willing to mobilize resources. There's obviously a lot of scrutiny on agriculture because it's important, but because it's also potentially very impermanent, which is, I think, part of the challenge. So much of what's needed is operational, and those operations and practices can change at the first sign of crisis, which is, fair enough in that position. You're faced with a risk to your livelihood. You've been lectured, educated on these particular climate smart practices, or biodiversity hat again on use of pesticides or fertilizers, and then it looks like a bad season, and you do what you know works and will get you your crop and your economic certainty. So the conversation around just transitions needs to recognize that reality, that there's a lot of risk in agriculture. I think we all know it, and the financial mechanisms need to recognize that risk exists, support reducing that risk, transferring that risk, guaranteeing against that risk for the investors who are mandated to operate on a commercial basis. I wish we had billions of grants to give. Unfortunately, we don't, so we need to get that money back somehow so we can re-lend it. So I think part of what's needed is what's been discussed. I don't want to sound like an echo chamber, but that data, that guidance, that policy dialogue that's inclusive, that recognizes and articulates from a data and science-based perspective what is needed, what the pathway looks like that secures resilient agriculture and the good jobs and livelihoods into the future. So this is one reason why we particularly value our relationship with FAO as a neutral third party with the expertise to inform some of these policies that can set the standards, set the incentives, set the regulations, that can steer agriculture in a particular direction and motivate the use of our finance to support that direction. Because it's, we are demand driven in some ways and we respond to client and country need. So if that need is well articulated, it's much easier to say, we're not making this up, this isn't some whim of a bank, this is something that's been objectively identified as an opportunity for this country, for this context. So we try to support that regulatory certainty, that clarity on expectations and need. We also recognize as well, we just know we are working with ICARDA on specific projects in Central Asia. I'm not sure in MENA, I'd have to check that. But we welcome the opportunity to work on a more systemic way as well, because when we have those pathways, that enables the finance to flow.
Sorry, Rula, she has some technical issues. She's just trying to fix it. We'll just wait for a minute.
Sorry. Yeah, just
she's
I'm
back.
back online. I'm very sorry. Thank God for the for the recording, because I'm really keen to listen to what I lost half of the second half of your intervention, Rachel. I'm
It was all
sorry.
good things about ICARDA.
Well, that's good to hear. Sona, what is, in your assessment, in your judgment, how will the COP presidency advocate to ensure that, I mean, we've heard from the minister, we've heard from you, from the Azerbaijani team, COP presidency, that there is high commitment for having a transformative agriculture on the basis of a just transition, and Harmonia is really an initiative that will give that big push. How do you see that being operationalized in the context of Azerbaijan in terms of finance, capacity building, institutional reform? What is really the policy tools? What are the policy tools that you really need to put in place to achieve that? Sona?
Thank you. Actually, during the initial discussion, we have found that there are already more than 90 initiatives already addressing the intersection of agriculture and climate change. Harmonia, that's why, will serve as a platform to bring these initiatives together, provide a space for them to share their activities, progress, challenges, and this will enable us to identify synergy gaps, fostering collaboration, and contribute these gaps, synergies, and etc. to policymakers. So Harmonia also will act as a vital bridge between MDBs and agricultural public development banks, which operate locally and provide microcredits to farmers. Also, Harmonia will work with Agri-PDB platform, which assembles agricultural public banks, ensuring that in the MDBs and this Agri-PDB platform is working together and align their work. Furthermore, Harmoniya will also collaborate with World Farmers Organizations and World Agriculture Forum, which has direct communication connection with farmers, farmer networks. And by listening to farmers, to their voices and understanding their needs, the initiative will be able to identify gaps and communicate this to stakeholders, ensure that farmers' concerns and other issues like needs, capacity building issues are addressed in global discussions. It will help to policymakers, also financial entities to take relevant actions.
Thank you. Thank you, Sona. Let me turn to Jan. Jan, from what you have listened so far, and as a researcher on climate issues, but also climate justice, and in the context of the MENA region, how do you see the concept of sustainable adaptation and agri-food and food security tally with what you have heard so far, and tally with the work on raising ambition for climate justice?
Yeah, thank you. I guess to answer that question properly, I would need to have another hour. But I think we already heard really great things. I think with the view to what Melissa provided already, I think we heard already great things. And I think what we can take from that is, on the one hand, that it's maybe from an academic perspective, we would call it a interdisciplinary or transdisciplinary perspective that aligns with local understandings of what a just transition is and how that should look like. So if we understand sustainable adaptation in that context, of course, it probably should mean resilience in the food system over a longer term, that does also acknowledge and do justice to local stakeholders on different sides. So from this interdisciplinary perspective, on the one hand, you could, of course, highlight the technical level. We have heard, of course, climate smart agriculture, efficient resource management, I guess innovation and technology integration is a big thing, of course. I mean, at the COP negotiations here, again, we rightly hear from many states that technology transfer is something that is urgently needed and demanded. So I think that's really, these are the different aspects on the technical side, so to speak, that are important. On the other hand, of course, that refers to also what we have heard before, is community engagement and empowerment. That is policy support, institutional frameworks, and of course also biodiversity conservation. So I think also these levels should be integrated into something that we then could call sustainable adaptation, because I think that all what we heard that already is part of what we need to do in the future to preserve and to take care of in a warming world. So these are maybe some aspects. Though the question still is, and that's also still something that's going on in the academic discussion, what does actually sustainable adaptation mean, right? So, and on the one hand, when we hear about adaptation, often in practice we see that still something like rather it's coping. with a situation. Then there are more projects or contexts in which we see some sort of incremental adaptation. So where we at least see some changes. But then, and I'm very happy to hear that in the initiative now, there is also the idea of transformative adaptation. Then, of course, the question is, okay, what needs to be transformed, right? So, and then we come again to the different scale. So, is it the farming practices on the local scale? No, we're also talking about policy conditions, national conditions, and potentially also regional dimensions where we need to have change. And when we or when I look at the MENA region, for example, there is unfortunately not too much cooperation in the moment, and that's something we definitely need to bring forward, because that's when we look at water in the region, something that is definitely lacking to move forward there. And just one final point is when we talk about adaptation, also the literature often has some sort of more or less, let's say, stable communities in mind. But the MENA region is characterized highly by migration and, as we can see in the moment, by conflict. And that has a strong impact on the resources and capabilities of on adaptation. And that's maybe a final point. We need to look at this also in combination or together, and I think that's also important to consider. Might not always have a direct impact, but there are definitely strong relations if we look at different countries like Lebanon or other countries who are, of course, strongly impacted by conflict right now.
Thank you very much, Jan, and I really appreciate that you've raised the issue of how migration but also conflict are really impacting the adaptive capacity of communities living around the Mediterranean and in the MENA region. And I think this is really, it's the interplay between that and climate is very strong, although sometimes we know that climate is a big influencer of this, but we don't see it coming out as strongly, and it gets overshadowed by the conflict situation and by problem of the lack of peace, and it becomes really it overshadows, although it's we see it in the region as natural resources are sometimes being weaponized in these conflict situations, and something to really keep in the back of our mind when we want to speak about a just transition, particularly in the agriculture sector. Let me now, we've heard a lot about seat at the table, about dialogue, about multi-stakeholder, farmers and women being agents of change, taking a leading role, not just being on the receptive side for building resilience, the role of technology, the role of knowledge and science and research to inform, to lead change, to really bring also around the table people out of their comfort zone to listen to what is really happening in terms of the challenges, but where are really the opportunities. Before I close, I would like to see if I don't think there are people who are asking for the floor, but if Charles and Inkar are around, if they would like to maybe have some thoughts on leading the process for in the steps after, and leading the process for how are we heading for operationalizing the just transition? How do we bring it closer to the Harmoniya Initiative? And what is really the path for showing that progress has been achieved in COP30 in Brazil. Charles or and Inkar? Inkar, yeah, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Rula. I can start, and Charles, please join. I think it's a very important question, Rula, that you're asking, but I'm afraid it'll be difficult to be, extremely clear now, because I think this is just the beginning of the conversation. Harmoniya was launched only 2 days ago, right? So it's absolutely brand new, and I think we have to maybe think collectively what's the most necessary, logical next step. But with regard to the engagement and support to the negotiations on just transition, there I think I have a bit more clarity. This 3-year just transition work program that has been adopted last year as part of the UEA consensus already has included a few concrete steps, right? The parties have agreed that there will be two thematic dialogues a year, and the themes for the dialogues would be selected based on the submissions that will come from parties and UN and non-party stakeholders. So maybe this could be one of the ways that we could collectively use to inform the negotiations, advocate for the recognition of the unique role of agri-food systems in the conversations on just transition, and maybe discuss with the parties. Many of us are part of the national constituencies or some consultative boards or some stakeholder conversations, expert groups, and we can advise parties that it is high time to have an open conversation within the negotiation space under the UNFCCC on the just transition in agriculture. At the moment, there is only one agenda where agriculture is being discussed, and it is good. We recognize that it is very important to have a very sector-specific targeted conversation on agri-food systems. But then I think the issue should be discussed in many other agenda items and around many different tables with different constellations of stakeholders. So I know with the CGIAR we already talked about preparing joint submissions, and maybe we should work ahead of time, a bit early, before the deadlines, thinking already, conceptualizing what could be those critical points that we want to convey to the negotiators. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Inkar. Before I give the floor to Charles, this is very important, as you said, and in different fora, and in the water sector, and in the global goal on adaptation, to see the agri-food system being quantified, being also really making its way to the agenda, but also really that ability to measure it so that you can really inform better policymakers and negotiators as well. Charles, I give you the floor to make also the closing statement, as I think we are just 2 minutes behind, just 2 minutes, but we started 2 minutes late. So I'll let you say your closing statement and takeaway from this session.
Thanks very much, Rula. I think this has been a really valuable session. We've had a lot of quite informative and deep perspectives and recommendations, and from all of our speakers and panelists. Well, I suppose one takeaway from this is that if we consider the climate challenge, we've got mitigation and adaptation. The just transition is really a cross-cutting principle applying to both mitigation and adaptation. And then when we look at adaptation and mitigation, we can pursue each of those independently, but in fact there can be co-benefits between both. So it kind of comes back to Rachel's point that we shouldn't silo all these things. We're talking about single pathways at a national level for just transitions, which it's important that we don't pitch one sector of society and economy and culture against each other as winners and losers. There has to be consensus building of what is the optimal just transition pathway for each country and the citizens in each country. So that's kind of critical. Then in terms of the financing, the Harmoniya initiative is really valuable because it is important also to get a commonality of direction between all of the financing for just transition, whether it is connecting to adaptation or mitigation initiatives, and Harmoniya, I think, plays an important role in that sense. So in a sense, this is really a question about consensus building, but then there are challenges in that. Not everybody in the agri-food system agrees about what the future of that system should look like, or what farmers should be involved in that system, what the value chains, the power dynamics, who the actors are. So the only way of building that consensus is through dialogue, and fostering dialogue through the fora like the United Nations, like regional bodies, between private and public sector, between the NGOs, civil society. Everybody needs to keep talking, otherwise it becomes a stasis, and meanwhile the planet keeps warming up and the most vulnerable are impacted. So I think this is really the value of the Harmoniya initiative, and moving from here and beyond to Brazil.
Thank you so much. And as Inkar and the distinguished colleagues have said, to be continued, really a conversation that is starting to be continued. And I would like to thank very much His Excellency Minister Mamadov and the team, the distinguished panelists, Sona, Rachel, Melissa, Jan, and of course yourself, Inkar and Charles, for a very very enlightening session and enlightening interventions. And sorry I'll bring it to a close. Sorry for taking 5 more minutes, Vanessa, but the floor is now yours for the second session. Thank you very much and goodbye.